Today we're talking about container gardening. So I'm assuming a lot of you already do a lot of containers. Am I wrong in that? Yeah. Raise your hands if you're doing containers. I love doing containers because it's kind of a controlled environment, right? You can control the soil, the water, you can move it to the sun or the shade, so you have a lot more ability to change things up with a container than you do in the ground. It's also much easier to plant in a container because our soils, if you've tried to dig around here, are quite interesting. So it is a challenge to dig, so container gardening is excellent. The concepts of container gardening you can also just transfer to raised bed gardening. So if you're building raised beds and you want to garden that way, a lot of the concepts, a lot of things we're going to talk about are the same. You can just use them for the raised beds. And the other thing I'm often frequently asked is, well, what can I grow in a container? And my answer is anything you want. You can pretty much grow about anything in a container. We grow everything from a great big standard peach tree down to little tiny succulents and cactuses. So there's really not a limit in what you can grow in there, but there's things to take into consideration, you know, size, depth, all that good stuff. So we're gonna kind of just start with the basics. If you guys have questions, feel free to shoot a hand up, and we'll just kind of, as we go along, we'll kind of go with that. So when you think about container gardening, of course, the first thing you're going to think about is your container, right? And that probably is it's one of the most important things, not totally the most important, but very important. So when it comes to containers, you can do wood containers, you can do concrete containers, you can do plastic containers, you can do metal containers, you name it, anything can be a container. The most important thing you need to think about in a container is that you have drainage. Drainage is very, very important. Make sure you have at least one good sized drain hole. If not, I mean, some of these things, like the plastics, you can usually put like 3 or 4, and I think that's great. But you definitely want at least one, and it needs to be fairly good sized. It can't be a little tiny prick hole in the bottom of your pot. It really needs to be a drainage hole. So that's very, very important, whether you're doing metal, wood, ceramic. I like a lot of the metal pots. They're really cool, but they don't always have drainage at the bottom. So make sure you're drilling some good size holes in there. A lot of people take like antique wash tubs and that kind of stuff, and I love that look, or wheelbarrows, that kind of thing. Really cool. Make sure you're giving some drainage to it, because I can tell you the old concept of, oh, I'll just do a little bit of gravel at the bottom and that'll help. No, because that water is still there, right? It's not really going to evaporate off very well, so you need to put drainage in it. So if it's grandma's antique bathtub, whatever, and you don't want to put holes in it, then I would say don't plant in it. Put some, we call it permanent color plants in there, artificial plants. But yeah, I mean, be practical about what you want to plant in. So first thing, drainage, very, very important. Second thing I'm going to mention, because a lot of us are doing our containers at our pretty brand new patio, or, you know, the landscape guys came in, they give you this gorgeous deck and you love it, but you got to water your plants, right? And if you give them just a little bit of water, because you don't want it to come out the bottom, you're not watering enough. So that being said, you need a saucer under there. There are plastic saucers, which these actually surprisingly hold up a long time. I'm constantly amazed at how well these hold up. After a few years, yeah, you're gonna have to replace it. Our sun is blistery, you know, it gets hot, so you will have to replace it. The ceramics, these suckers hold up forever and ever and ever. The negative with these guys, they're a little pricey. Now the pottery people tell me there's a reason why, because they throw out more than they actually make and blah, 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 to keep them straight and flat. I'm like, okay, maybe. But they are a little more expensive. But they last 5, 10, 20 times as long as the plastic. So you gotta make that choice. You know, do I wanna put the money into it, or I don't care, I'm gonna throw a plastic one under it and change it out at some point. The other thing I really recommend are pot feet. So this is one style of pot foot. You're sticking them underneath that pot to lift it up a little bit. This is another style. I'll actually open it so you can see it. So this one goes underneath the pot. There's your little lip to keep your pot in place. The great thing about pot feet is, number one, they allow your pot to drain. Because if your pot is flat against the saucer, it can't always drain really well. So sticking some pot feet in there can definitely help with drainage. Where's my pot? Okay, I know the colors don't match, but it's all right. See how that lifts it up a little bit? It's going to allow that pot to drain, so it's not going to get plugged up. And the other thing it does is it allows for air circulation. So roots need air, they need oxygen, because if they're always wet, they're not happy. Yes, ma'am?
What about if you put your pot on gravel, like that, or something like that, or you're just putting it on the rock?
Sure.
Yeah.
So her question is, what if you're putting your pot on rock or gravel? Perfectly fine. I really wouldn't necessarily worry about that too much because it's going to drain through. Yeah. It's mainly when you're putting it on a flat surface, a saucer, or something like that. Granite, you know, or gravel, you're getting that flow through there, and it allows for oxygen to move up. So giving that little bit of space, really important. It protects your the saucers protect the patios, the pot feet give you the air circulation and allows for drainage. So those are a couple of things I would think about when you're getting ready to put your pot together. Some people use a brick, a piece of wood, I don't care. Yeah, they make some really cute pot feet too. I have a set that's actually feet. That's really cute. So that's really important. So once you get your pot in your saucers or wherever you're going to be putting it, you don't have to have a saucer. Sometimes in the heat of summer, when it's June and it's stinking hot and you're like, oh, I gotta go water that pot again, I gotta water it again. Putting a saucer under it will help you with the hydration, because you can water it to the point where there's some moisture in here still, and then throughout the day that pot will draw it up. So in the heat of summer, I do like to do saucers under my really thirsty things, because it just keeps me from having to constantly run out there and water them. So that's another good reason for saucers. And then once we get through with that whole concept, is there any questions on containers? Yes?
Is it good or bad to put like a piece of screen over the hole?
I think it's an excellent idea.
Oh, okay.
So her question was, is it good or bad to put screening over the hole? I like the idea, totally fine with it. I've used actual like window screening. I've even used landscape fabric that has the permeable. And the reason for that is it's going to keep that soil in there. So the water still runs through, but your soil isn't over time going to move through there.
I use coffee filters.
Oh, coffee filters. Do they hold up over the long run?
I don't know.
Okay.
Dark
Oh,
rock.
we'll find out. Okay.
I guess I'll have to check that.
So the main thing is you want good drainage through there. And then that leads us to our potting soil. So the type of potting soil you use is very important too. And a lot of people, I would say, and I totally understand it, A lot of people tend to wanna, what's a nice way to say it, cheap out when it comes to the potting soil, or they're looking for they're like, why can't I just go pull it from my yard? Or, you know, I saw 3 bags for $5 at an unnamed place, and, you know, it's cheap. And I get that, I understand that. But if you're talking plant health, and if you're gonna spend the money to get your pot ready, you're gonna spend money to pick out your plants, I would encourage you heartily to spend the money to get the right potting soil, because it does make a difference. Our potting soil, of course I'm gonna push our potting soil. Ken formulated this potting soil a few years ago. We used to actually grow out in Chino. So our grower was looking for the ultimate potting soil to grow things in, because, you know, growers are nerdy that way. And so they're looking for the right mix of peat moss with, you know, the mulch and the bark chips and the perlite and all that kind of stuff. So they put together this mix, and we've kept essentially the same mix for, I don't know, gotta be 7, 8 years now, maybe more. And we do have people test it. We'll go to people we know that grow, and we'll say, check our potting soil, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And it does, and it's been very consistent. So our potting soil is what you call a soilless potting soil. A lot of peat moss in here, a lot of peat moss. There's also some perlite in here, there's some mulch. You'll find some kind of small little woody chips every once in a while, but that's basically from the mulch, which is basically very composted green goods. So it's a really good potting soil in that it allows for drainage. One of the weird things about a good potting soil is it stays moist, but it drains. If you get a potting soil that has a lot of, I forget what they call it, but it holds on to the moisture in it, and it's too heavy, that soil never dries out. And that is not good for your plants. Your plant roots need some oxygen. So you need a soil that will go somewhat dry, but not compact as it goes dry, or just stays constantly wet. There's that fine line in there. Yes?
What's a good soil for succulents?
For succulents, there is, if I was doing succulents or cactus, I would definitely get a cactus mix, because that has a lot more sand in it. So a cactus mix with a lot of sand is really gonna be for those plants that don't want to be wet at all. So succulents and cactus, you could use this. You would have to make sure you're not watering too much. But if I had a choice, I would go with the cactus mix on it. So soil is very important. Now, the negative with a potting soil that has a lot of peat moss in it is when it gets dry. So say you're gone for 3 weeks and nobody watered your plants while you were gone. This is gonna dry out. That peat moss in there is gonna contract and dry out. And the challenge, once it's dried out, is to get it moist again, to rehydrate it. So you really have to pour the water on if it's gotten dry, because what happens is you put water in there, and instead of penetrating in, sometimes it just goes right around, just cascading around. So, you know, that's the one negative. One way to counteract that, so these are Aqua Boost crystals. Aqua Boost crystals do a couple of things. There's mycorrhizas in here, which are kind of the tan little things in there. Mycorrhizas are good fungi that help with root growth. So very important. The little white things in here are water crystals. What water crystals do is when they get wet, they expand up. So they get nice little round balls. What they do over time is they slowly release the moisture out of that little ball. So it's kind of a way of helping your soil stay moist, but it's still going to allow for drainage because the air is going to be able to move around those. And the great thing about these is I mean, they don't hang on to it so much that you never ever have to water again, and they, you know, it's just a big muddy bog in there because they're slowly releasing that moisture. So it kind of keeps the roots hydrated, it keeps them cool. Very good product to use, especially in containers. I use it in all my containers, except for cactus. That I don't use it in. It gives you directions on here on the side. My one word I always caution everybody is follow the directions. Because if I were to dump this whole thing in here, I would have nothing but an oozy, gooey, bubbling, you would think you're being taken over by aliens kind of thing. So you definitely don't want to use more than is recommended. So when you get ready to pot, you got your potting soil, you're all set to go, you put your Aqua Boost crystals in there. The other thing I would say is make sure your soil is not sopping wet, but moist. You should be able to, like this, I can kind of clump it and it stays together, but it's not a mud pie. It just has a really nice feel to it. It's not overly wet, it's not overly dry. If your soil is dry when you're getting ready to plant, I would recommend getting your water bucket. And I'm gonna trip myself. Throw some water in there and then just kind of mix it. Kind of like a good bread dough or something like that. You wanna mix it and get it so that it's the right texture for you. You do not want to plant into a dry soil. You really don't. You want to get it hydrated because if that soil's dry, it does a couple of things. First of all, you're gonna get your plants in there and water it, and what do you think is gonna happen? All that soil's gonna settle down, and you'll be like, and you're trying to lift your plants back up and throw more soil in. So make sure it's hydrated. The other thing is, if it's really dry and you put your nice little plant in there, it's gonna suck the moisture right away from the roots of that plant. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so her question is, she's using drip irrigation to run through the bottom of her pots to water her pots with. And she's going through the drip, the whole drainage hole, and that's fine. That's a really good way to do it, really. I've done that, and I've also done it on top. I like the look of bringing it through the bottom because it's a lot cleaner looking. You just got to watch. The other thing with that is make sure you're not pinching the irrigation hose. So if you're setting that pot right on there, sometimes it pinches it. So be careful with that. So if you're putting a nice little plant into dry soil, it's going to wick that water away, and you're going to have a dry plant. And dry plant is a stress plant. So you've got your potting soil nice and moist, you've gotten your Aqua Boost crystals in there. The other thing I like to put in, and of course they gave me the 20-pound bag. Okay. This is the plant food. So this is an all natural, slow release plant food. It's great to put in your new containers because you're going to want to get some extra nutrient in there. This is not going to burn your plants. That's what I like about it, is I can use it, I can put new plants in there, and I don't have to worry about frying those new little tiny root hairs off. So this is the meat and potatoes. This is, I am hungry, I haven't eaten for days, and I just want something. I need a steak and some potatoes. So this is the heavy duty one. And there's directions down there too, use as directed. And you're gonna throw some of that in. I don't wanna open this whole new bag, or I wouldn't. And you just throw a little bit in there and you're mixing it right in with your soil. Some people ask, can I do it at the end? Certainly. If you forget while you're putting it together, you're like, oh, it's fine to put it on top. No big deal. So you've got your fertilizer in there, you've got your nice soil, you've got your Aqua Boost crystals. Now comes the hard part. What plants am I going to put in there? Like I said before, what do you want to put in there? You can put anything in your containers. What you want to think about when you're putting containers together is, am I putting plants together that have like needs? So if you're going to put cactus together, say you have a beautiful autumn joy sedum here in the middle, well, the last thing I'm going to put with it is, where'd it go? I'm not gonna put a fuchsia with it, right? Because they have totally different needs. This wants shade, it wants moisture, cactus wants sun, and it wants to be dry. So when you're thinking about your plants that you want to put together, make sure you're getting ones that have like needs. It doesn't matter if you're doing perennials and annuals. So a perennial is a plant that comes back every year. It's always there. It may go dormant, it may go to sleep in the wintertime, but that root structure is still there and still active. You can put perennials and annuals together, not a big deal, but make sure they have the same wants and needs. There again, they want the sun, give them sun, shade, shade. There is a caveat to that, we'll talk about it later. When it comes to the design of your pot, what you want to put together, other than like needs, like wants, there are no rules. Some of you are going, no rules. It's okay, there's no rules. You can put pots together that are similar colors. Some people like to stay in the same color theme. Say you like pink, pink is your thing. You're gonna go all pink. You can do that. So this one I just kind of kept all pink. Maybe I want to throw a little white in there just for a little contrast. Maybe I want something really tall in there. So I'm going to throw that in there. You can do same colors in the same color palette. You can do completely opposite color palettes. I love pink and orange together. I didn't bring any orange up here, but I love doing pink and orange together. Maybe you want to throw some purple in there. Now, what I wouldn't do, see now I'm starting to mix my plant needs because I have a salvia which loves the sun. It can take the sun and the heat. But this little geranium, probably not going to be happy mid-June on a hot patio out in full sun. It's going to suffer. So I maybe might go, I'm not going to put the geranium in there, but you know what loves the sun? Vinca. Vinca absolutely loves the sun. So maybe I want to put that in there instead. Or Penta. Anybody grow pentas? No. You should grow pentas. Lovely plants. Great for butterflies. Loves the heat. I've seen these down in Phoenix where they're just like, oh. Definitely a wonderful, wonderful plant to put in. Underutilized, I think, because people just don't know that much about it. But Penta comes in white, it comes in pink, it comes in red, it comes in purple. Wonderful plant.
Is it perennial?
It's an annual, unfortunately. This is another, so this is Kufia. Kufia is another one that loves the sun. So maybe I want to switch out one of my calabacoas because they like the sun, but sometimes they're overdone, right? So we want to throw something else in there. We'll throw in a real pretty Kufia. It likes the sun, has the same plant needs, water needs as all the rest of that in there. This is Vinca, but it's a cascading Vinca. So there's upright, that's going to grow upright, and there's cascading that's going to drape over and soften the edge of your pot. So a lot of, the other question that comes down is how do you design the pot? How do you know what to put where? And there again, there's no rules. The common thought is thrill, fill, and spill. So thrill is that tall thing in the center that catches your eye. You're like, ooh, what is that? So it's that tall thing in the center. Your filler would be that kind of does what it says. It fills that space between your tall thriller and your spiller. Do you have to do it that way? No. If you like it that way, do it. If you don't, then don't. The other thing to think about is, so this is a Dracaena, probably not happy in true, full, hot sun. But I've grown it on my back patio where it's pretty hot. So I'm kind of up in the air about that. Where was I going? Oh, other thing to think about is when you're designing your pot, is it going to be seen from all sides? You know, is it in the middle of a patio table or on a walkway where you're seeing it from all sides of the pot? Because if it is, you're going to want to make sure you've got enough flowers to go all the way around that pot. So whichever direction you're looking at it from, it's beautiful, right? If you're not, if it's going against a wall, well, then it gives you don't need to worry about the back side of the pot because nobody's really going to see it. So you can build your pot with your tall thing in the back. It gives you room to put a little more fillers in there. Now I've picked all really big pots because big pots is in gallon size in my plants because it fills the pot really fast, right? You see this, I've got 4 things in there and one of them's small. So I can make a beautiful pot with big full flowers and it's like already popping and ready to go. I'm not waiting 3 weeks for this little tiny 6-pack flower to kind of get big so that I can see it. I'm not against 6-packs. What I'm all for is using my time really well. And I love to garden, but I like to garden quick. I like instantaneous, oh, beautiful, look at that. I'm not a patient gardener, I guess. So yes, you can use 6-packs and they have a way, there's a good use for them to tuck in and fill holes. But what I think a mistake a lot of people make is they're using little tiny plants in these big pots and they're going, well, I'll be patient, it'll grow out. Well, don't you want something that you just go, oh, look what I did, that's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and the flowers are stronger because they got a bigger root system. They're gonna be able to take a lot more stress and heat than a little tiny 6-pack that has this itty bitty root to it. And more often than not, I will use a 6-pack to kind of fill in. And you know what happens? Quite honestly, it keels over. Those little tiny 6-packs go, I'm done. But by then, most of the rest of the stuff is filled in. So I kind of like to start big. Saves you a lot of time. So you can design your pot however you like. Thrill, fill, and spill is kind of the mantra, the rule. But like I said before, there are no rules. Do what you want. If you like it, you like the way it looks, that's all that matters. When you're picking out your plants, like I said, pick ones that like to go together. Different textures are nice. It's nice to see different leaf style, different bloom textures. It just adds more interest. But if that's not your thing, do what you like. Put it together. Great thing to do when you're trying to think about putting your pots together and you don't have your pot with you is use the top of a shopping cart. Oh, good Lord. Good thing I'm strong. So if you don't have your pot, but you want to figure out what are these plants going to look like in my pot, use the top of the shopping cart. You kind of know how big your pot opening is. Is it 12 inches? Is it 18 inches? And kind of start building from there. Do I like these colors together? Oh, well, I got tall, but I don't have anything to fill in here. So maybe I need something to fill in. So I'm going to throw that Vinca in there to kind of give it a step down. Oh, but now I've got 2 Vincas that don't like that. I'm going to throw in some Lobularia because I like the white. It gives me a different contrast in flower and color. So you can kind of play with it without actually taking it home and then putting it together and going, I hate that. What was I thinking when I put that together? So use the top of your cart to help you figure out how many flowers you need and how you want them to look. How many of you grow Lobularia? Do you like it?
Yeah. Wax. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very, I think it's a nice substitution for alyssum because it drapes down. I mean, I have some in my front pots. My front pots are probably about this big, and it's probably at least halfway down my pot right now. Absolutely gorgeous. And it'll stay that way until December, January. I think last year we had such a warm winter that I think it was at least January, February before it finally, it does recede, kind of like the alyssum, it does recede. So definitely a really cool plant. If you haven't tried this, I would try it.
What about the sun? Will it take into the sun?
Yep, my pots are right out in front of my garage, so they get all day sun. Literally all day sun. Say again?
Spell the name.
Spell it.
Yes.
Okay, the spelling for it is Lobularia. Lobularia.
It's right over there.
Yes. The other one I really like that's similar to this is a euphorbia. It's called snowdrift. It doesn't drape down as far, and boy, but it can take the sun. It can take a hot spot. There again, kind of a different texture in the flower, kind of delicate. I love using white too as a contrast. Sometimes we get too much of the darker colors or the brighter colors, but white definitely helps you with the contrast, but it just lightens it a little bit, gives you a nice look. So, okay, and pots. So when you get home and you're ready to pot your pot, I'm gonna move that thing back over here again. Give myself a hernia. Okay. Okay, so now I'm ready to pot. I'm gonna pull this out because it really doesn't go with these guys very well. But you know what? Maybe I want to be very creative and daring. I could think about throwing a red yucca in here. This would be a perennial, so it would always be in my pot, and it's evergreen. So I could think about throwing that in there. Pretty similar in their water usage because these guys, they all love the sun. They want a good drink, but they go a little dry in between. So it would be a pretty good combination. If I wanted to be really safe, I could throw another succulent in there. Creeping rosemary, wonderful, wonderful little spiller for those pots that get a lot of heat and sun. Animal resistant for you that have javelina. The negative with using something like this, or I was looking for the periwinkle, but I didn't bring it up, is over time, this will overtake your pot.
Yeah.
So sometimes what I'll do is after a season, I'll take it out and I'll put it in my herb garden or in my perennial garden, or I just yank the snot out of it so it's just a little tiny piece left back in there, and I let that grow out again next year. So you just have to be cautious when you're using things like periwinkle and rosemary. Ivy is another one that'll overtake. So be a little careful with those guys.
What's the name of the other one?
This one?
Yeah, it's the second one, yeah.
This is Angelina Sedum. Angelina. This is great because even in the wintertime, it keeps this color. Really cool. Sedum, S-E-D-U-M. And there's a bazillion types of sedum. Okay, but before I get carried away too much, I decided, I'm gonna keep it simple. I'm just gonna use this guy. The other thing to do when you get home is before you pull all your plants out of their pots, arrange them in your bowl and keep them in their pots, but arrange them how you think you might want them to look. What that does is it keeps that root somewhat protected while you're messing around with it. Because if you pull it out of the pot and then you go, the root's off there. Now it's exposed, right? Now when it's this humid and it's raining, not too big a deal. But if it was end of May, first part of June, it's 100 degrees, the wind is blowing, this is gonna dry that root out really, really fast. So if I'm playing with it and go, I don't like that, and I set it aside on the patio where it's hot sun, it's gonna be hard on it. So just leave them in their pots while you're arranging it, gives them a little more protection. But once you've decided and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, you know, you can start pulling those suckers out. So I pulled this one out of the pot. That root system, it's been in that pot a while, so it's just going all around itself. You want to loosen those roots, massage the roots, tickle the roots, whatever you want to call it, but you got to loosen them up. And you loosen them from the bottom, and you loosen them from the side. Now, when you're doing like a gallon size annual here, you might say, well, you're more than tickling that root. You're massacring that root. Well, there's a lot of roots tucked into that ball, and if I don't loosen them up, they're never going to go out. They're just going to stay real tight and compact, and that's not good. You want those roots to grow out because that's how they're going to get stronger. You're going to get the moisture, get the food. So you can definitely loosen them up. The other thing is, the other reason I'm not a huge fan of 6-packs is what happens when you loosen up a 6-pack. Yeah, it falls apart. They're not as strong. Sometimes when you pull them out, the bottom part just kind of falls off. That's okay. I don't get too excited about it unless like 2/3 of it falls off, then we got a problem.
How long does that last? Through what month?
The Penta, it'll last until we get a hard frost. So depending upon when that frost comes, which can happen anywhere from middle of October to November, you'd be fine. And a lot of times, I mean, it takes a hard frost. I mean, it's not like the first frosting on the pumpkins. It takes a good one to knock them out.
How does it do with the wind? Because we have wind like
No other.
yes, and that seems that does more damage to my plants. I planted a lobelia in a pot with a geranium. The geranium seems to be the only thing doing
Happy.
the lobelia is just fighting. Ooh, that
I
one.
think there's a few roots on that one.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna pull those puppies right off. It's okay. The Penta would do fine in the wind. I mean, maybe not hurricane force winds,
Yeah.
but lobelias is touchy.
Yeah.
I would have to say it's one of the more touchier plants out there. You can't overwater it, you can't underwater it. It takes very specific things. So that's where I would put a lobularia in.
It's so beautiful though.
Yeah. Usually the smaller the leaf on the plant or tree or shrub, the more wind it can take, because that wind is just going to blow right through that. You got a bigger leaf, that wind's going to catch it and it's going to hit it against the other leaves, and you're going to get more wind damage, more tear damage on it. Also comes down to transpiration. The bigger the leaf, the more moisture is going to come out of the leaf. The smaller the leaf, the less moisture. So I've loosened that all up. You don't have to keep the original shape of your pot. It's okay if you pull some of this off the top too. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I gotta take it, put it in. It's okay. You don't have to. So maybe I'm gonna put that there. For my pot, I'm only gonna see it from one side. So I'm gonna put my big thing in the back. I got my 2 fillers, and now I want some spillers. And I kind of like this calibrachoa because it's giving me a nice bright color, kind of a nice contrast. The other thing I would say, now all these plants have been moist. When I pulled them out of the pot, they feel moist, which is good. You want them moist. If they're dry, if you pick up that pot and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so dry, water it before you plant it. Because there again, if you put dry roots into the rest of that moist, it's going to suck the moisture out. So make sure all your plants are hydrated and your soil's hydrated when you plant. Now, these guys were big enough when I put them in that I didn't have to shove some extra soil under the bottom of them to lift them up. This root ball is a little small, right, compared to the rest. So if I were to just stick it in, I've lost it, right? So that's where you have your bucket next to you, and you can push some soil up in your pot, up in there, so that it's got something under it to keep it where you want it to be. And I'm gonna throw this lobularia in here. and I don't have enough soil in this pot, but if I go over and drag that, the screen's gonna be empty for like 10 minutes. And so imagine I'm putting this in here. The other thing with your spillers, you know, I know the temptation is to put it in just like that, right? Because that's where you think it needs to be. You can put these in at an angle, and that way it's spilling much faster. It's already got that direction going to it. Is spacing an issue in a container? Yes and no. So I've got a little more soil in here. So now I've got it built up. I can kind of put it in there at an angle. It gives it a nice look rather than just like that where it doesn't show as much. So technically I could do it with that and my Calabacoa so that they both have that nice flow to them already. Spacing. So yes, I mean you don't want to cram them so tight together that they can't wiggle their toes. But I think a lot of people leave way too much room. I think a nice full pot is pleasing. It's what you want to see. If I was worried about spacing, maybe I'd go, oh, well, I can't put that in there. So I'm only going to put this in there. It's not quite as pretty, right? Not quite as full. But I've got room. And some people go, well, it'll fill out. Well, yeah, it will. Right. But it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm into instant gratification, I guess. I want it to look pretty now. I want to enjoy my pots now. I want to go out with my coffee in the morning and go, oh, it's a beautiful pot. Let me deadhead you, make you happy. So I like nice and full. I like to give it that look right away. Would I want to cram like 3 more things in here? Probably not. If I was truly daring, I could probably cram some 6 packs of something in here, and they might make it, they might not, but I'd rather just go big or go home. Is what I'm saying. So, yeah, so this is a nice look. It's nice and full. The roots have room to grow. You know, it is a happy pot, right? Now, in here, so I put my soil in the bottom to fill it up where I thought I was going to need it. I put some additional soil in to build up where my little plants were going to go. But now I have these great big gaping holes between my root balls. So this is where you got to go back in and do the fine tuning on your pot. And I would lift it up and show you, but no. So this is where you get your soil, and you're going to start filling your holes. You're going to start with the obvious ones, and you'll see them. And it's not clean, it's not neat, it's a very messy part of it. But it's important. You can always sweep up later, right?
Yeah.
Now in your potting soil, if you get like these little clumpy things, just make sure you're breaking them up. It's just where it's gotten itself all clumped together. So I've filled most of my holes. I don't see any big glaring ones. But now you want to tamp it down. You're just going to lightly push that soil down to make sure you don't have any great big air pockets or great big holes. Because if you do, and you go to water, it hits that great big hole and it goes whoosh right through. And you're not watering anything then. So I found a great big hole over here. So I'm going to throw some soil in there. Pretty good. And it feels pretty good. I got another hole that if I were taking the time to do it properly, I would fill. But you kind of tamp it down lightly. The other thing I would say is give yourself some room to water. So if I fill this pot all the way to the top with soil and then I go to water it, yeah, and it's all over the patio again. So give yourself an inch or so at the top so that when you do water it, it's not going to make a huge mess. So once you've kind of got it tamped down in there, make sure you water it in. You want to water that soil, not to the point of soggy, but you want to water it let that soil settle a little bit because you're going to get some more settling. So after you've watered it, the water's kind of gone through, feel again. Do I have any big holes? Well, yeah, I do. So you're going to go through and kind of fill those holes again. Just lightly tamping it down. Don't smoosh it down. So once you think you've got everything full, everything's happy, you got yourself room, you don't feel any great big air pockets, that's when I do kind of a final watering. And when I do my final watering, I use Root and Grow in the bucket. Root and Grow, my hair is stuck in my mouth and I don't want to do this. So Root and Grow is it's kind of like the old B1. You guys remember B1? Anyways, Root and Grow has rooting hormones in it. It has products that help with the stress of a replanting. Because, I mean, look what we've done. We've taken their little roots and we loosened them up and we put them in new soil and now they're not under a greenhouse, they're in the sun. So they're going to be a little stressed. So the Root and Grow helps with that stress. It encourages fine root hairs, which is what we want. We want those roots to grow out. This is concentrated. I think it's about 3.5 tablespoons in a gallon of water. So I just get my watering bucket. Now I'm not a measurer. I don't measure when I cook either. So I just pour some in that looks. It would be hard to overdo it. I mean, if I put this entire bottle in there, yeah, I could be overdoing it. But you know, I know I've got moisture in here, so I just kind of guess and I throw it in. If you like to measure, you can measure. So I put that in, and then I do my final, just kind of a light watering, not a real heavy, because I've gotten it moisture as I've gone along, right? So I just kind of do a little final watering in there, just to make sure everything's nice and hydrated. The Root and Grow, the thing that's nice about this, again, you can use it more than once. You can use it till it's gone. It's a great product to use that way. There is a light fertilizer in there. Main thing about it is if it's been a week or so and you're like, oh, I'm going to use this again, make sure you've gotten some water on those roots first and then water in with the Root and Grow. You don't want to put it on a dry plant. Okay, so that's my one caution with that. So now you have your beautiful pot. It's watered, it's lovely. It's been 3 weeks, and by golly, it went out of bloom. Now it just kind of, so plants that bloom, they're using a lot of food, right? They're constantly eating. So we got to feed that. We've used our meat and potatoes, and this is a great food, but sometimes we have to give it a Red Bull or a double shot espresso mocha something. And that's what this is. So this is Flower Power 54. That middle number, 54, means it's very high in phosphorus. Phosphorus is what plants need to bloom. So you're gonna kick them in the pants with the Flower Power. This is water soluble, a couple of scoops in a bucket, and you water. The other caution with this is kind of the same thing. Sorry, it's gonna drive me nuts. If your pot is really dry, just throw some moisture in there first and then fertilize. Fertilizer on a dry plant, dry pot, not always the best. Get some moisture in there first. You can use this about every 2 weeks to really keep things blooming. If you're really struggling and plants have gone out of bloom and they're just not doing it, use it once a week until they start blooming. This is great for veggies too, if your tomatoes aren't blooming, your squash are sitting there looking at you. So anything that blooms, this is a great product for. Any questions on that? All right, I hit you up with a couple other things. I have been battling budworm this year on my petunias. Anybody else have budworm? They're little tiny, little caterpillar wormy things, and you know you have them if you go out. They love petunias. If you go out and your blossom is like half eaten and there's holes in the leaves and there's little black dots all over your leaves, that's when you know you have budworm. The little black dots are the budworm poop, so. This, I spray my petunias with this, and it really, really has helped keep it down. The eggs are laid by the moths, and then the worms hatch out and they eat. So it's not a one-time you spray and magically they're gone, because the moths are always flying around laying eggs. So you have to kind of keep up on it, but this works very, very well. For any kind of bug problems you might have with your flowers, it's a great spray for that.
How often?
I'm one of those people, I don't spray unless I see a problem. So I kind of wait and see. Now on my budworm, I've been spraying about every 2 weeks because I don't want those nasty critters to get a foothold again. But typically I wait until I see an insect. Yes? This is Water's multi-purpose spray. This is a good one to have in your arsenal because it gets caterpillars and beetles and you name it. It takes care of aphids, wonderful on aphids.
Slugs.
If I had slugs, I would probably use Sluggo. It would be better. Yeah, it's an organic product, a nice one. Copper fungicide, just because this time of year we start seeing powdery mildew, other fungal issues show up because it's humid, we have moisture, not a lot of air circulation. So if you start seeing powdery mildew, which just looks like a fine layer of dust on some of your leaves, definitely get it treated. Because once that powdery mildew gets a foothold on there, it stops the plant from being able to use the leaves to make food for itself. So you do want to take care of it. And copper fungicide's been around for eons. Really nice organic to use for powdery mildew in those situations. Okay, I'm gonna shove this out of the way. I run over a few toes while I'm doing it. So I just kind of threw together. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to something else? Yes, sir.
How deep do you think the growing potting mix should be? Like, you don't need to fill it all the way to the bottom.
Okay. So
especially the tall pot.
right. So his question is, if you have a great big pot, how deep should that potting soil be? And the question comes down to, what are you putting in that pot? So if I had a huge pot and I'm just putting annuals in it, they're gonna die once we get a hard frost. I know I need about this much soil. What's that, foot and a half? Because it doesn't need a lot of soil for roots to grow into, because they're not gonna survive, right? So you're only gonna get them until we get a hard frost. So it doesn't need a ton of root growth. If I'm putting a perennial in there, if I'm putting in some succulents or the yucca that I had, I would probably fill the whole pot with potting soil, because those plants are going to stay there for a long, long time. I want them to have room for their roots to grow, because they're continually growing. So it kind of depends on what you're putting into your pots, I guess I would say. Does that make sense? Yes?
My sister-in-law, at her front door, it's covered, she has really tall, and she just wanted like trailing plants. So she put empty soda bottles in the bottom. Is she crazy? I told her she was.
Whether she's crazy or not, can't make the determination. But yes, you can do that. People use milk jugs, soda bottles. Sometimes they'll take a grower's pot and turn it upside down. There's a lot of ways you can do it. And that, I'm totally fine with that if you're just growing some annuals in there. Or maybe even succulents, because succulents don't have to be deep, deep rooted. But if you're gonna grow a perennial in there, a shrub, a tree, you want potting soil all the way down to the bottom. So, the other thing I wouldn't use, which some people have used, is the packing peanuts. I don't know about that one. Okay, any other questions? Okay. I'm just gonna show you a few combinations that you could put together using maybe some things you hadn't thought about. So herbs, and we talked a little bit about rosemary, but there's a lot of different herbs that you can use in your pots. This is oregano. Oregano would make a terrific spiller, right? Very, very pretty. And the great thing about herbs is they're animal resistant. So if you've got a lot of squirrels, javelinas, issues with that, using herbs in your pots is a good way to go. And you can cook with it. That's right. So these would make a really pretty spiller. This is golden oregano, which I love. I don't know how it is in cooking, but I love the color of it. It's a great one to use. There again, like we talked about with the rosemary, left to itself, it could take over the world. So you gotta be a little careful when you're, make sure to keep it pulled out or move it when you're done with it. This would make a good filler. It's a variegated sage, cooking sage. It's really, really pretty. I mean, I could have taken my pot and easily thrown that right in there. Yeah. So don't be afraid to mix, herbs in with things. This is creeping thyme, English thyme. We have a lawn of this. Works really well. We only have to mow it like twice a year. Very low water use. It makes a really nice ground cover lawn type thing. Grasses. I really like to use grasses in my pots. So this would be a perennial. This one went up my nose. So this is plumetastic. It's a muhly grass. Oh, it's gorgeous when it's in bloom. Absolutely gorgeous, and the wind catches it and it just waves. I can use the other one I like, but I didn't have a small one of is I can't think of the name of it now. It's a sedge. It's kind of a brown color. Which some people go, ooh, brown, looks like it's dead. But when you put color around it, really, really pretty. So using grasses in your pots, you can certainly do that. But make sure you're using a big enough pot, because this is definitely going to root out and take hold. So don't be afraid to use grasses. What else did I bring up here? Oh, I just brought some other pretty. You guys grow mandevilla? I love this plant. When we first got it, everybody said shade, 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 so I always put it in the shade. And then I got brave and I'm like, I'm gonna throw it out in the sun. It is an annual, it is beautiful and it is tough. So I've thrown it with other things in a pot, kind of in the center, ones I have are really big. And it does excellent, and it just keeps blooming. It's an amazing plant. It comes in reds and whites, and there's even some variegated ones. But a really cool plant that I don't think enough people use.
How about the animals? Mine's upstairs on a deck protected, but out in the garden?
I've never had a problem with it. And we do have javelina that come through. And they've never messed with it, but
We have deer and javelina and horse bunnies.
yeah, it kind of has a waxy leaf to it, kind of a heavy waxy leaf, with most of the critters don't really care for. But I have to say it's untested. Who wants to test it for me? The other thing about this, if you have just this in a pot, you could move it inside. It will not take the winter, but you could move it inside, treat it as a house plant. Or I give mine to my sister because she lives down in Phoenix, and so she has it all winter long, and then I get it back. So some of mine are huge. Yeah. Same thing with Springer Rye Fern. You can put it in your pots. It won't winter over, but you can bring it inside. Nice bright room.
Would the begonia grow inside?
Begonia would too. Which I don't know what I did with it.
It's right.
That's fuchsia.
Or fuchsia. Oh, I thought.
Oh, here's my begonia.
Oh,
That's a
okay.
variety of begonia. Yeah, and those actually grow inside. You gotta have a bright room. Fuchsia, I don't know. I don't think so, but I haven't tried it.
Okay.
So this is another plant that I really, really, really like. And this is sweet potato vine. Sweet potato vine comes in the green. It also comes in a really dark color. And there's one that I didn't have, but we had it earlier. It's kind of a green and pink one. Beautiful. I put it in my front pots this year. If you want something that's going to drape and just go down and take over and start growing up the sides, this is an amazing plant. It is fast growing. I I like this color particularly because it contrasts so well with other things that you have going against colors. And the thing I like about this is I can put it in the shade or I can put it in the sun and it doesn't care. Now this one, I've noticed because I've experimented, this one doesn't like the sun as much. So I usually put this one in my shadier pots. I think with that dark leaf, it's just absorbing so much heat that it just struggles. This one, it doesn't care. I put it out in full hot sun, put it in the shade, and it grows equally well no matter where I put it. So if you're like cautious and you're like, I have black thumbs, nothing grows, do something like these easy plants. This is crazy easy. Vinca, crazy easy to grow. If you're new or you just feel like you're struggle, talk to people and find out what's fail safe. Now, what can I put out there and I don't have to baby it along and worry about it? Because there truly are some plants that you can do that with that are just tough as nails. And then the succulents, which we touched on a little bit. I'm becoming more and more a succulent fan just because they don't require a lot of care. You know, I can leave town for 2 or 3 days and I don't have to worry about coming back and finding little crispy critters. The other thing I like about succulents, and these in particular, these are all evergreen. In the wintertime, they're gonna still look like this, which is amazing. I love that. Very, very hardy perennials. This one is fast becoming one of my favorites. This is Rainbow Ascot. So I've had this in a pot. I think it might be going on its 3rd year now. And it's wonderful. It's out in the hot, hot sun. I don't have to pay a lot of attention to it. It kind of takes care of itself. Beautiful. It's not truly a blossom in the spring, but I call it a blossom. That are like a chartreuse green. And then it blooms for forever. And then I just cut the blooms off and the plant just starts growing again. So succulents are really, really interesting. There's a lot of texture in them. Just be careful. There's a lot of succulents that are not winter hardy for here. So if you want to keep it in a pot year round outside, make sure it's winter hardy because not all of them are.
Is that one the Angelina?
Say again?
What's the name of the one to your right? That one. Is that the Angelina?
That's the Angelina.
And then that one?
This one's Rainbow Ascot Euphorbia, and this is Dragon's Blood Sedum.
Dragons?
These are all winter hardy.
So in this patio, sun,
You bet.
Red Yucca?
I just grabbed a few other things. These are more shade lovers, but there again, no reason you couldn't put them in pots. They're all hardy for here, even the fern, but it's definitely going to want a shadier spot. But just to really, people don't think about ferns here, you know, which I get, I understand. But in the right spot, really, really pretty. Would go dormant in the wintertime, so it won't be that pretty come January. Heucheras. Heucheras can take some sun, but a nice filler. A lot of them, even in the wintertime, will keep their leaves and color to them. So another one real nice. Just grab these guys. Coneflower Echinacea. A real pretty perennial, nice bright blooms. It would make a nice center of your pot. Or if it's a really big pot, you could use it as a filler. So just tonight, it's kind of getting you to think about all the different things you could put in your pots. And this is what I was talking about with 6-packs. Now this one is a perennial. You would need more of a shade, but it's a good example if I can get it out. See how little that root system is? Yeah. So if you're using little 6-packs, just be really careful when you're using them. And when you water, the other thing is you have to make sure you're getting these little guys watered because they dry out really fast. So that's what I was talking about with 6-packs.
What is that?
This is Veronica. It's a blue, I think it's blue waterfall, but real pretty. It'll go dormant in the wintertime, but it makes a really pretty spiller over your pot. And I think we're about done. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am. That's a Dracaena as well. I would put it where it gets some shade. Now, that being said, we grew a great big one out in a pot on our back patio. By June, it looked kind of rough. It lived, but it wasn't that pretty. So I would give it some more shade. But yeah, it's a Dracaena. And that's another one you could take inside and treat as a houseplant in the wintertime. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention that I bring my geraniums in the winter.
Yes. So she was saying she brings her geraniums in the winter, and that's a great to do. You know, a lot of people like to winter them over, and they easily do that. Yeah, and they come back nice and big and gorgeous. I guess it just comes down to, do you have the space to keep them? Right. Okay, you guys have been fabulous. If you have any questions, come up afterwards.